The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dan Bucher, and I'm the Communications Manager here at AFSA. Welcome to PCI Compliance and Your Call Center, presented by PayNearMe. This presentation is part of AFSA's Business Partner Webinar Series, which allows industry experts to share timely, educational topics directly with AFSA members. The webinars are designed to provide information that will allow AFSA members to more effectively design, develop, and implement strategies for their company success. For more information about the series or how to become a presenter, feel free to reach out to me following the presentation. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. Today's webinar will last approximately 35 minutes with a few minutes for questions following. To ask a question, please use the question box on the side of your screen, and I'll read them aloud to Steve and Matt following our presentation. The slides and a recording of today's webinar will be available later today on the Webinar Resource Center. There's also 2 poll questions throughout the presentation. The results are confidential, so please feel free to answer. And finally, you'll receive a survey when the webinar is over. Take a second to complete it for us. Your responses help us fine-tune the program so we can target the issues that are most important to you. PayNearMe is the industry's only platform that facilitates cash, debit, credit, and ACH payments for thousands of businesses and government agencies nationwide. With its great mobile experience, PayNearMe's technology provides a simple way for lenders to collect payments through an intuitive, consistent experience for their customers. In addition, payment reminders and mobile wallet integration drive more on-time payments. And let me tell you a bit about our presenters. Steve Kramer is the VP of Product at PayNearMe, bringing more than 20 years of experience in the e-commerce and payments industry. Previously, Steve has been in charge of product at such companies as Western Union and ACI Worldwide. Steve holds a degree in computer science from Virginia Tech and has spoken on the topic of bill payment trends at numerous conferences and webinars. Matt Disbrow is a senior sales executive for PayNearMe's merchant processing business in North America. Matt has over 13 years of experience in the payments and fintech sectors. Prior to PayNearMe, he led the global sales team in sales for a global multi-billion-dollar payments company. Matt has helped multiple payments companies launch new verticals with exceptional results. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Matt and Steve.
All right, great. So just to provide a quick agenda, but before I do, I just want to thank you, Dan, for providing a quick overview of PayNearMe and what it is we do. Also, thanks for the kind words about Steve and I. And thanks to all the attendees that took a few minutes with us today. Our goal is to hope that you learn something new in the next 35 minutes or so. So without further ado, we'll go through the state of PCI. And as it stands today, the cost of not complying beyond just the fine itself, things you can do to protect your company and what you should be aware of. And then we'll have an open forum for a few Q&As. But first, a note from our CISO, Kurt. We will not tell you that this webinar is a replacement for compliance. We definitely won't tell you that everything is an absolute. We absolutely won't tell you this stock is accurate in perpetuity, since things are always changing. And most importantly, don't forget, compliance does not mean security, and security does not mean compliance. All right, now that all the legal T&Cs are out of the way, let's switch gears to the state of PCI. I know most of you are familiar with this, but some maybe not. So we thought we would share just a few points. So I will pass it over to my good friend and colleague, Steve Kramer, to enlighten us further. Steve, take it away.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it, and welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. Pardon me for a moment. We're having, I think, a little technical issue in trying to get the slides to move forward.
Sorry about that, Steve. Let me take a look.
Yeah, Dan, if you can give me a hand.
Give it a try now,
I have a degree in computer science, and yet can't make slides work. So, you know, shows you how long ago that degree was. No, for some reason not. Dan, can you just move them for me?
Sure.
They're not advancing. There we go. Thank you. So let's jump one more, and apologies, everybody. We'll get this worked out. So I'm going to give a little bit of background here on the state of PCI and some statistics that if you're not familiar with, you should be. And maybe you are. Maybe that's the reason you're on this webinar today. So let's jump to the next one, Dan. Just wanted to let everyone know, one of the main things, and this really struck me when we were starting to prepare for this webinar. You know, I read the news, you know, I follow this industry closely, yet the numbers still amaze me. You know, since 2000, So, what is that? 14 years ago now, PCI really coming into play. If you jump to the next slide, you'll see 11.5 billion customer records have been compromised. That number is just staggering to me. And I think a lot of consumers at this point, it's almost a learned helplessness feeling. They're almost expecting that their data is going to get hit, or they're constantly thinking about it whenever they're interacting with somebody online. And if you hit the next slide as well, the reason behind that is there have been more than 8,000 data breaches that have been made public in that timeline. You literally can't read the news these days without reading about another data breach going on, another company being hit. And just when you think about the impacts of that, not just to the consumer's mindset of, am I going to trust a site or a company to give my personal data to, but just from a reputational risk of those companies and the reputational hit those companies have taken. And we're going to go through a couple of case studies here to show you what has happened in a few of these examples. But before we do that, let's take a step back, jump to the next slide, and talk about what is PCI, the payment card industry, what are the standards, what's really involved there, Dan. So if you jump to the next one, PCI is a set of security standards, and the whole idea, back one, sorry. It's really to have a way that all companies can accept, process, store, and transmit card data in a secure environment. It's there to make it so that everybody is following similar standards, and so there's a level of trust in storing of card data. There are 4 different levels to PCI. You can see them shown here, really based on how many cards you are processing annually. And the level of, or the compliance burden goes up as you'd expect as you move up levels here. Anything from down to a level 3 or level 4 processor, where it's really more of a self-assessment you're doing to make sure and following the standards. And there are a set of standards that'll show you have to follow, all the way up to level 1 compliance, where you are getting a formal yearly audit, you're getting quarterly scans. There's a whole document that gets produced every year that shows where your compliance are, where your weak spots are, what areas need to be fixed. It becomes a pretty big burden, and that yearly audit can take months to finish up at times, and can be a very expensive process. So if you jump to the next slide, you'll see that there are really 6 major PCI control objectives, and you can see them here. I won't read them all out to you on the phone, but it really is around not only is the card data secure, is the network secure, do you have access controls, are you monitoring, do you have proper policies in place? Those are really the main objectives behind PCI. Where we are going to focus today, though, is all about protecting the card holder data. This is, to me, one of the keys, right? Are you properly protecting it? Are your consumers feeling like the data is properly being protected? Are they comfortable giving their card data to you? So that's where today's focus is going to be. So we jump to the next slide. Before we dig in here and talk in even more detail and give you some case studies, we're going to do a quick poll for the audience. How do you guys handle PCI compliance today? So you should see a poll opening on the screen. And please select which one you do. Do you handle everything internally? Do you outsource your compliance to your vendors? Is it kind of a mix between the two, internal and external controls? Are you a company that just says, we don't take cards, so PCI doesn't apply to me? In which case, yes, you're right, you have no PCI complaint. Or that last one, which I'm hoping nobody here selects, I have no idea what we do for PCI today. So we'll give it just another second or two. Looks like we have our thing, and there are our results. Okay, so really, it looks like it's a mix of internal and external controls. We do have about a quarter that say we do it all internally, and there are 10% out there that do outsource it all to vendors. 5% saying I have no idea. That's a little scary. Hopefully this webinar will give you the tools to now go back and go, I feel better now in terms of what we have to do. But let's jump to that next slide.
So Steve, real quick, just wanted to mention one thing. So you've talked about the different levels of PCI that were based on transactional levels and the complexity there. But as you saw on the last slide, there was a good percentage of there that push it all to their vendors or kind of have a mix of that. So if they're using an outsource, or using another vendor, they're good, right? They don't have to worry about this, and we're good?
Yeah, no. not so much. So, and as you'll see here from this slide, it doesn't matter whether you outsource it and say, you know what, I'm just going to have a vendor take care of all of this for me. You know, they're going to hold my card data on that. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, as the merchant who is accepting payments, you are the one responsible for keeping the data safe, for protecting the consumer. And at the end of the day, you are the one that's going to be on the hook for preventing breaches, for vetting the vendors, and should there ever be an incident, right, about what happens there, you're going to be the one that's going to be on the hook. So no, unfortunately, that's not the case. At the end of the day, it's still on you. So let's take a look at three quick case studies that are out there in terms of companies that had issues, and you know, you've probably read about these breaches in years past. But let's dive into them a little bit more. So let's jump to the next one. There was a very large breach at TJ Maxx, or TJX is that the main company is known. And when you look at what happened here, this was a company that was strong. If you jump to the next one there, Dan, this is a company that, you know, yes, you know, their data was stored internally, right? And they, you know, on the registers, that data was stored encrypted. At the back office, it was stored encrypted. If they transmitted the data outside of their stores, everything was encrypted. You know, they felt like they were really covered in terms of where they were from a PCI. This kind of gets to that thing Matt talked about at the beginning in the legalese, the difference between compliance and security, right? Everything was good, except at various times during the day, their registers would transmit their card data to their back office inside the store, but on a non-fully secured Wi-Fi network. And hackers discovered this and were able to steal that card data as it was in transit inside the store. I don't know that the news is all fully out there or if it's all been fully published. What I have heard was that sometimes hackers would just sit outside the store and be able to intercept that Wi-Fi signal. So here's a company that, even though they thought, look, we're good, right? We've got it encrypted in data. We're all, you know, anytime we send our data outside our stores, we're solid. Except there was a technology breakdown, right? Inside the store, that data wasn't necessarily fully encrypted and fully secured. And that's how the breach occurred. If we jump to the next slide, partnerships are another big example of where there can be a weakness in PCI. Target, you can see the numbers here. The dollar numbers get larger and larger as we go up here. $18.5 million penalty here. And what happened here was very interesting. There, again, they were pretty well secured. Everything was pretty good for Target, except they had an HVAC vendor that had come in, and the HVAC vendor, because the HVAC system was tied into the Target network, the HVAC vendor needed access to the network, and Target granted them access. Well, that HVAC vendor wasn't secure, and they got hacked. And the hackers, through there, were able to then get into the Target network and steal more than 40 million credit card numbers. Just amazing. And who would think, right, that my HVAC vendor is going to cause me issues, right? But again, it's about partnerships. Are all of your partners who have any kind of access secured? Do I know that they're taken care of? You know, it's often, as we talk about that weakest link in the chain can often be the biggest problem. And finally, if we look at the third one, AT&T. So that's the next slide then. AT&T ended up paying $25 million in fines. AT&T, I mean, when you think about networks and security and data, you know, there's a company that you would think, oh, okay, they've got it covered, right? They're not going to have an issue. AT&T had an issue at one of their call centers, what we're talking about here. This was call center employees, and it ended up being just about 3 call center employees were stealing cardholder data. The full story is actually pretty interesting. It sounds like something out of a movie. They were actually selling it to some shadowy group, some shadowy person known as El Pelon, or apparently that translates to the bald one, which sounds very ominous. But you know, they were actually stealing the data at the AT&T call center. AT&T actually became aware of the issue early on, and while they dismissed some employees, didn't do the full investigation. And as a result, the breach occurred even longer, and tremendous amounts of consumer and cardholder data was stolen. So once again, even though a company as secure as AT&T, a company that has all the security standards locked up, oftentimes it's your employees you have to worry about. And are you tracking properly? And if you know an issue has occurred, are you taking the right actions based on that issue? So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Matt for just a moment.
Wow. So thanks, Steve. That was some pretty scary stuff. And to think that was just a few of the risks. So I think that we all need to take away from this one important goal, and that's the next slide, is that we all should aim to not be on this list. Next slide. So I know Steve named some big names, but others like Yahoo, Marriott, Uber, Equifax we've heard recently in the news, and in aggregate, millions, if not billions of dollars in fines, revenue losses, customer trust, loss of customers, and more. So it's more than just the actual fine itself, as we saw with AT&T and in Target, $200 million of loss from that one exposure. So Steve, please help us. Tell us, what can we do to not end up on this list?
Yeah, exactly. We talk about, top 10 lists or here's one you don't want to be on, right? So there are a couple of different ways, and we're going to walk through in terms of how you can avoid getting on that list, or as somebody said, don't become famous, right? So if we jump to the next slide there, there's one really easy way you can avoid ending up on that list. Dan, if we can run to the next slide. One way would be for your slides to work properly. There we go. So what can you do? You can eliminate your call center entirely. There's one way not to worry about PCI compliance in the call center. And, yeah, we're joking here, but, only kind of. You run to the next slide, Dan. So as a wise man once said, you can't breach my call center data if there's no call center. So obviously, we are kind of doing this tongue-in-cheek on this one, right? Nobody can eliminate their call center. As much as you want to automate, as much as you want to push people to self-serve, at the end of the day, there's always that human touch, right? You're always going to have people who want to talk to folks at the call center. They're always going to want to have that interaction, or, they're going to be working in your call center on something else, some other facility, selling a new service or offer or a technical issue or whatever. And then they'll say, oh, and by the way, while I'm here, let me make a payment, and you don't want to have it be that, nope, we're not going to let you, right? You have to go to one of those self-service, or I can't do it, or you have to walk in. It just obviously isn't very good customer service. So obviously that's not really a way we're really suggesting. Next way, if we go to the next slide, to avoid PCI issues and cardholder data at the call center would be, Dan, can you reveal the next slide for me?
Steve, it seems like your computer may be running a bit behind. So,
okay.
Yep.
Maybe it is.
Don't take cards is your next slide,
Don't
right?
take cards. There we go. Sorry, Dan. So it's me. All right. We'll blame me. That's good. Don't take cards. There's one way to avoid having PCI issues in your call center. Again, not really a great solution here, right? And if you look at this next slide, right, you can push people and say, look, we're just going to take ACH in our call center. That's the only place I'm going to do it. Here's the problem with that. I'd ask you right now, those of you on the phone, if I said to you, hey, you have a bill due right now, let's go take that payment. Think about it. How many of you have your checkbook with you right now? Or how many of you have your routing and transit number memorized? My guess is very few. But if I said, how many of you have your debit card on you right now? My guess is almost everybody on this call. We thought about putting a poll up here, but we want to, figured that'd be just silly, right? Just about everyone on this call would say, yeah, I've got a debit card. So you want to reach consumers where they're comfortable and where they're used to doing it. You don't want to have someone on the phone and go, can you go get your checkbook? And especially if you deal with Gen Z or the millennial generation, as the parent of a millennial, I can tell you, my son, I don't think he has any idea where his checkbook is. I think he's written one check in his lifetime. So if you ever ask him, hey, can you get me your routing number and account number? I think he'd kind of look at you sideways and go, I don't even understand that. You know, how does that work? But again, if you said to him, can you get me your debit card? Yeah, that wouldn't be a problem at all. So be careful, right? You don't want to say, I'm just going to eliminate cards and shut out several generations. And that third bullet on there, you know, there are still a bunch of unbanked and underbanked folks in the U.S. And very often they're working with prepaid type cards, where again, they may not have access to a checking account. So really, you know, turning off the call center, saying I'm not going to take cards at the call center, really just aren't practical approaches to how we're going to approach this today. So Matt, I think I'm going to be turning it over to you for a moment.
Yeah, so thanks. Yeah, you're right. I mean, in the last 10 years, I've literally ordered one box of checks. So, and I still haven't gone through them. So, you know, I think it's clear, you know, we have to have a call center. It provides a level of support. And for certain consumers, it's the only way they pay. It's just the way they have to call in. They want to talk to somebody, that physical, you know, touch, if you will. You know, we also know we have to take cards. We risk alienating certain consumers, as you said, millennials. And ultimately, we, the merchant, are still responsible. So no matter if we use a vendor for protecting card data or card holder data or not, we still are responsible for that data to be protected. So Steve, please tell us, what can we do to actually protect ourselves?
Okay, so you're right. Let's get to some more practical answers other than just eliminating your call center or eliminating cards, right? So if we jump to the next slide, one of the things you're going to need to do is bolster your physical security. I mean, on-site security really is that first line of defense. I know that sounds very trite, but if you think of that AT&T example, it's a great example of just, were they monitoring their employees? Were they allowing things that would allow their employees to steal data? And were they taking action? If they knew there was an issue? So simply checking with on-site security and bolstering that on-site security, it really is the most important. So let's take on the next slide a bit of examples on what's really involved in keeping that call center secure. And you can see there are 4 things here. We can go through each of them. You know, I won't read them to you on the phone, but there are 4 main areas you have to watch out for, right? Physical media. You know, anything that allows a call center rep to get a hold of somehow that data, whether it's paper and pencil, whether it's USB devices, whether it's their phones. I've worked in places where people who have access to this type of data, their phones are not permitted with them when they are on the floor doing that type of work. The phones have to be kept somewhere separately. Encrypting the data. PCI security standards require that data at rest and in motion must be encrypted. That means if you are storing cardholder data of any kind in your system, that has to be encrypted. And anytime you transmit that data anywhere, as we learned from that TGX story, that transmission needs to be encrypted as well. Surveillance, including cameras and including call recordings, very important. However, you do need to be careful on call recording, obviously, because if you're recording calls, if you're recording customer service calls, you have to make sure that recording either is turned off when the card number is read out, or that recording immediately gets scrubbed. And then there are 4th options out there. There are custom hardware solutions in the market today that can do things like encrypt lines or transfer and allow, you know, things that hook directly into your phone system to mask cardholder information. These can be great solutions, but they can be complex solutions, and they can be somewhat expensive solutions as well. So what else can we do? Well, let's look at the next slide about, you can enable customer payments over the phone. So, you know, you're getting the consumer is calling into you and wants to do something, right? And they want to make a payment. You know, while, again, we talked about, yes, you still need to take them at your call center, but what can you do to get it more customer driven, to get them pushed towards self-service options? And there are a few ways you can approach this. The first way, on the next slide, would be to implement an IVR. And we've talked about this with a number of folks in the past, right? Very simple, right? Can I have the consumer on the phone? Can I offer them and say there's an 800 number you can call when I'm on the phone with them? can I transfer them directly to an 800 number in order to allow them to make that payment and then transfer them back? What's nice about that is if they come into me and I transfer them the 800 number to make the payment and I transfer them back, I do get a consistent experience. My volume at the call center, especially if I start training consumers to dial that number directly, I can lower my volume at my call center. I can really minimize errors, right? Because now the consumer's typing it in, and I don't have to worry about someone fat fingering it, a CSR agent. So there can be some real power to getting the consumer to go to an IVR or to transfer them to an IVR. However, there can be some trade-offs here as well. One is if you do it wrong, boy, can it be a big turnoff for the consumer. You may have seen a call or a commercial out there for T-Mobile. It's very funny. If you haven't seen it, you can look it up. Of just people yelling at phones and just looking for things as they get transferred back and forth, agent to IVR to agent. Press 0, wait, please wait on hold. If implemented improperly, it can just be an awful experience. So we really recommend that while it's great and an IVR can be very powerful, and transferring to an IVR is very powerful. Make sure you implement it properly. Make sure you're looking at the right consumer experience in terms of how you're treating the consumer there. The next slide, other ways, really is pushing the consumer towards self-service. What can you do to educate them on that? Are you getting them to your website? Do you take cards at your website? All of that can be very valuable in terms of, trying to drive the consumer away from the CSR. And the big thing there is once you do get them trained on self-service, or once you start pushing them to self-service, it has to be a frictionless experience, right? It has to be simple. When you're prioritizing what you need to work on at your site, that user experience on taking the payment needs to be simple. If it's not, they're going to leave it. They're not going to come back. They're going to pick up the phone. They're going to call you. Is it responsive design? Especially as you look more and more at the way people access the internet today. And again, especially if you look at it generationally, more and more people using the phone is the #1 way they are accessing the internet. So is your payment system that's online fully responsive? Is it easy to work with on the phone and get in there and get the payment made? But just as a realist, right, you have to be careful. Not everybody is a great fit here for all of these self-service options, which is why you really need to offer as many options as possible. I was actually just speaking to a person at a good-sized healthcare facility, and they said, oh, here's how we did it. We went to an IVR, and that really took care of it, and we outsourced, we took care of our PCI. And I said, really? What about those consumers who don't want to deal with an IVR, or zero out, or they don't, that's not a system they're used to? You're still taking payments at your call center, right? And the person said, yeah, we are. We reduced the volume nicely, and now we still have just a few people locked in a small room. But yeah, we still did. So there are additional ways that you can do, especially with the current demographics and current generations that's accessing your systems to come in and make a payment. So we go to the next slide. Here's one way that we found is really an interesting way to do it, which is a push to SMS or an email. So the idea here is I've got the consumer on the phone. They called me. They said, look, they want to make a payment now. Hey, I'm on the phone with the rep, and I'm saying, yeah, okay, my amount's due. Yep, I'm millennial. I have my debit card right here. I'm ready to go. The ability for your call center rep to say, hey, you know what? For security's sake and for your own security, I'm going to push you an SMS or I'm going to push you an email and stay on the line with you right now and let you go in and enter your information yourself. That way, you don't have to read your card data to me. If the person's out in public, they may not want to read it in public, right? They may not want people around them, listening to them, or they just may feel more secure in, I'm going to enter this thing on my phone. I'm not going to read it to you. I'm not going to have somebody on the other end of the line taking the payment. So it's a very powerful way where you can right there and then say to the CSR, send this out, press this button, the consumer gets a text, gets an email, and now they can enter the payment data themselves. And save that for future use. So the next time they pick up their phone, come onto the website, call the IVR, whatever, we go, oh, yeah, we've got your card. It's ending in 1234. Do you want to just use that? And now now we have no issue, right? There's no cardholder data the consumer is reading to us or that's ever at risk in that regard. So we found it to be a very powerful thing. Again, not all sizes fit all people, right? Of course, this requires a smartphone or computer access, so it may not be the perfect fit for everybody calling in, but yet another way to handle that case of let me get this data out of my call center, let me start driving consumers to self-service, and even more importantly, let's give our consumers the feeling that I'm taking their security seriously, that I want to protect their card data. Let's let them feel that as well and know that, oh, wow, this is a merchant that really is concerned about this and is taking care of me and wants me to help, wants me to be a part of this to secure my card data, especially with the 8,000 breaches we were talking about earlier. So on the next slide, when you really look at the big picture here, right, it's not just, there's no one size fits all. There's no one silver bullet here, unfortunately. I wish there was. There really isn't. It really is a diversified solution. What combination of solutions can you provide that you can get a secure and compliant payment that's both CSR and customer friendly, that secures your data, that makes it frictionless for the consumer? And if you go to the next slide, am I doing my vendor due diligence? Not just on all my vendors in my ecosystem, but I also want to make sure that I work with my vendors that are coming in here and saying, hey, yeah, I can help you out on your card compliance, right? Well, is that vendor, where are they in the market? Have they done this before? What solutions do they offer? A full range of solutions? Or are you having a vendor coming in and go, yeah, let me just put you in IVR, your PCI is taken care of, and you want to go, yeah, that doesn't sound right. Right? That doesn't feel like the right solution anymore, right? There's always a diversity of solutions, and you always want to look for a vendor that understands the diversity, that understands the landscape. If we jump to the next slide, there's a really fascinating case study evaluating partners. And as we said, you're not just checking you want to check all your partners, not just your payment partners, but obviously your payment partners are among your most important here, right? Obviously, you want to make sure they are PCI compliant. You want to examine what's called their ROC or their compliance statement. It could be an attestation of compliance, or it could be a full ROC. That depends on the level of PCI they do. Not to get too PCI geeky here, but there can be different levels based on who your vendor is, but you want to examine that and make sure that they are up to date, that they've had no issues in the past. But you also want to make sure, as that third bullet says, that whichever vendor you're selecting really is thinking about security, right? That needs to be top of mind, but is also thinking about that as a frictionless process. I don't want to put a lot of hoops in place for my consumer. Ask about their uptime, right? It's great to get a vendor in there. It's a really solid vendor. It's been in the space a long time. But if their uptime isn't very good, if they're not hitting 4 nines of uptime, and suddenly they're going to be down, and now that's going to drive more calls into your call center where you don't want them, and the security is higher, well, that's not good either. And finally, there's a thing called the Van Halen test. I'll be honest, I had not heard about it until we were getting ready for this, and I just love the idea here. So for those of you of a similar age to me, may remember the hard rock band Van Halen from the 70s and 80s. They were known for some hard rocking ways back in the day, but they also had shows with big pyrotechnics and, explosions and all that sort of thing. In their contracts that they would put out to the vendors or to the venue that was going to host them, there were a lot of stipulations in their contract, and one of the stipulations was that you had to provide them a bowl of M&Ms with all of the brown M&Ms removed. And people used to say when this word got out, oh, this is just a diva band out there. No, actually, it was very intentional and very smart. It was just a line in the contract. And if they showed up at the venue and there wasn't that bowl of M&Ms with the brown ones split out, then they knew that the venue had not read the contract carefully enough. And what else might be missing in terms of the safety equipment around all the pyrotechnics they had on the band, around the show. So it would be a way for the band to possibly walk out and, knowing Van Halen, possibly do some damage to the hotel in the process. But it was really an interesting way that this band that you wouldn't think of built in to say, am I doing my due diligence on my vendors, the ones that are taking care of me? So I'm not saying you should put an M&M test in all of your contracts, but it's something to think about as you go forward. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you here.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. The M&M test, I like it. So I appreciate it. So today we provided the state of PCI. I think we shine light on areas you've never even thought of, right? It's a Wi-Fi hack, if you will, and what we can do to protect ourselves. I think we saw that ultimately the risk of non-compliance could be detrimental to your business. I mean, think about the AT&T of over $200 million in losses. It sounded like, again, there are just no silver bullets, no single solution. And in the end, it's a shared responsibility between the merchant and the vendor. So an action we should all take as we leave today is, right, we keep reviewing our processes. Think about when card information could be exposed. Put the eyes of the consumer on. And last, if you've used the same vendor for a long time, maybe it's a good time to review what they're doing to protect you. Next slide. I think it's important to understand that there are different levels of PCI compliance. Know what level of protecting you should be doing. Understand how consumers are actually making those payments. At what points of entry could that card information be exposed? We can't just shut off our recording system and expect all of our call center reps not to write it down. Understand your customers' preferences. Everyone is different. Think about the millennials. You must meet the consumer where they want to be met. You have to offer options for all consumers, like the 10 million underbanked consumers, for example, with a cash option. And last, do it all securely and compliantly by bringing in knowledgeable vendors. Give them the Van Halen test. Last but not least, next slide, sorry. So again, PayNearMe, Steve, and I have been doing this for a long time. We've helped thousands of merchants over the last 10 years process billions of dollars in transactions. We're a great resource in the industry for you and happy to chat with you anytime. So I think now is a really good time for us to open it up to Q&A and go there.
Well, awesome, Matt and Steve. Thank you so much. Got a few questions, and while I'm pitching you these questions, I'll launch this poll for everybody. Feel free to answer that poll as well. Steve, got a couple questions here came in. Here's the first one. This individual is a level 3 PCI that outsources nearly all of their compliance needs. If one of their vendors drops the ball, do they still have to clean up the vendor's mess?
So unfortunately, and I don't want to give legal advice here, at the end of the day, yes, right? You're the merchant. You're the one who has to clean up the mess. Now, you can pass off a lot of that cleaning up of the mess and, all financially and all of that to the vendor contractually. But at the end of the day, it's your name that's on the line, right? It's your name that's going to be known as the one that had the breach, even if it wasn't you, even if it was your vendor that you passed it off to. And yes, at the end of the day, you're the one that's ultimately responsible. So while outsourcing is great and certainly can help you, that's why I think Matt and I were talking so much about, you really do want to vet your vendors to make sure that they can cover what you're looking for and that they've got the level of security as well as frictionless consumer thinking that you really need here.
Great. Another question here, and I had the same question. When you were talking about the dangers or the possible dangers of collecting card information from consumers over the phone. I mean, is there even a way that it's compliant to collect cards over the phone at all?
Steve, I'll take that one. Okay. So, I know we talked about a lot of this, but it is compliant to still take, card payments over the phone. There are ways of putting things in place to protect the data. Typically call centers are using some kind of a vendor hosted solution to key the card data in, and that solution is compliant. But what I would say is, however, at the end of the day, outside of that actual software system, that's where you have to kind of think about ways of protecting it. We could always have a rogue agent that could steal the card info, as we saw with the AT&T comment. But that should not deter you from taking cards over the phone. We definitely have ways of protecting, as you saw with the pushing to the SMS and email and other ways that we can help protect, and others can help protect that card over the phone payment.
Great. And time for one more question here. This individual biting on the PayNearMe hook. Does the software that PayNearMe offers help limit the scope of PCI review? You know, we were talking about the various levels, 1 through 4. You know, people may or may not know what level they are. I mean, does PCI's software actually, you know, really help limit the scope of that review?
So the answer is yes, right? I don't want to be a commercial for PayNearMe, but, you know, most of the solutions we discussed here, you know, PayNearMe, we've got the ability, as we talked about, to be able to push out to consumers that text or that email to say from your call center, why don't you just help the consumer self-serve, as well as the self-serve options. We can also work with you in terms of how you can drive those consumers to self-serve, what touch points you want to use to do that. Yeah, our goal here is to work with our clients to help reduce their PCI scope and really make it a better experience both for them as well as their consumers, that frictionless approach. You know, as well as our absurd commitment to uptime as well, to keep your systems up at all times and to make sure that, you know, when your consumers want to interact, it's a frictionless, seamless experience for them. It works when they go to do it and really does lower the burden for PCI for you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for presenting that information with us there, Steve and Matt. That's a ton of stuff to chew on. Before we wrap up, any final thoughts from either of you guys?
Yeah, sure. So I think, again, we this topic enough, but, you know, there's no silver bullets. It's a shared risk. You have to do your due diligence. You know, it may be time to re-review your payment infrastructure, depending on how long it's been in place. Look for vendors that offer more, you know, the card, ACH, and cash. Understand, you know, your levels of compliance and your levels of need of security, all while keeping that focus on the customer experience. And then last but not least is compliance does not equal security, and security does not equal compliance. And that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Matt, and thank you, Steve, as well, for your expertise on this topic. Want to point everybody to the final slide here. Matt's information is there on the slide, and recording and the slides will be available as well following the presentation. Want to thank PayNearMe so much for today's webinar, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. This concludes our presentation. Thanks.